Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Thursday, which is Thursday, but it's time for another how to bass tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how to make this sound, which accidentally kind of sounds like a race car. That wasn't really a plan of mine, but it kind of worked out that way. Anyway, let's get right into this. This is a patcher. It contains a citrus, a vocodex, some EQs, a maximus, some reverb, and a sub. Without the sub, this is what it sounds like. It's pretty much all contained up in here. Some seriously massive and ridiculous EQ because I don't really care about my own rules. But let's listen to what this sounds like more or less step by step. So this first stop here is done with ring modulation. And thinking about how an engine works, it actually makes sense that this kind of resulted in this particular result. Although I don't believe I would have done it so well, even if I were trying. If I were specifically angling to get the sound, I probably wouldn't have done it like this. Although I have seen other people like actually synthesize way more convincing engine sounds, and they did it with citrus and that kind of thing, and it was very impressive. But anyway, what's going on is that there are two square waves, and they're just straight up regular square waves, and they're being RM'd by slightly different shapes. One of them is a straight sine wave, and the other one is a kind of a pinched sine wave done with this tension knob here. By themselves, for example, like this first guy, without the unison, because there's also unison involved, but this is what the first dude sounds like. And here's what the other one sounds like. Now the other one was reesing a bit because the pitch is different from the RM on that one, and that's really the crux of why of the sort of the merging of the two. They were combining two regular square waves that are being RM'd at different frequencies, so they kind of clash in particular ways. The one that's being RM'd by itself by different frequencies would clash more or less by itself, but I put it against in there, the other sound that's being RM'd against it gave it just a slight extra complication. Put in the filter, and the filter isn't really filtering, but it is wave shaping. And this shape is pretty harsh. It's sort of designed to just kind of wreck it a bit. And of course, this is what it sounds like. With the wave shaper on, the mix is on halfway. I experimented with modulating the mix in real time, but it didn't pan out quite as well as I expected it to. I also have a little bit of oversampling engaged, but that's actually because of something that I'm not doing anymore, so I'm not 100% sure if that's necessary. Although, when you're doing crazy distortion and crazy FM and crazy RM, you probably are going to be working with frequencies that are far higher than Nyquist. It's just very likely. It's just that usually the resulting aliasing is something that we come to expect to the point that we interpret that as being part of the sound intentionally. And I'm almost always never saying the words bad when it comes to describing how aliasing sounds, because sometimes that's just, you want it there. It's part of what you expect to hear. You just aren't aware that's what it is. In this case, though, I was doing something else before I got to this point, because I was just kind of experimenting, you know, hoping to arrive at something cool. Yeah, that's what's going on. Oh yeah, the unison. That's what I wanted. Now, when you're using unison in sort of regular unison, like not something like Harmor, although you could do this in Harmor too, but you gotta like do it on purpose. When you have really high phase counts like this, you're more or less losing any kind of sharpness you might have had, because without the unison, there's a bit of sharpness and even a little bit of squelch going on in there. With the unison rather, it's more or less completely smoothed out, and that's sort of what happens when you mess around with phase. Like phase relationship of something like either kicks or snares or even this is stuff like sounds and actual notes. It's very important. Always talking about the rules I mentioned earlier about like not cutting super hard or whatever, using minimum phase filters is what you do to avoid losing your phase like relationship, because chances are like the nice feelings of like how sharp something is will get messed with, and you won't really have that togetherness anymore. And if we just do that on purpose, we can use it specifically to smooth things out. And that's sort of a primary purpose of unison in general. But yeah, putting the vocodex, surprise, surprise. This vocodex's purpose is slightly different than usual, though. It's more about almost distortion than it is about getting any kind of vocoder-like effect out of it. I've screwed around with the band distribution and the bandwidth enough that like it's just a big mess in there. the pitch, as you can see, is down, and I think I didn't mess with the pitch in here, but like when you move the pitch around, you don't really hear it move like a formant movement like you're used to hearing. It's more of a texture change. And that's kind of sort of what I wanted out of this. Like you can see that there's plenty of both the modulator and the carrier along with the wet, without the compression inside this thing coming out all at once. So it's more of like a big layer than it is me trying really hard to get like a Vocodex kind of sound out of it. It goes into EQ, and it's taking care of a lot of like strange higher frequency problems that I'm actually not totally sure exist in this iteration of it, but at one point did. And like I made a lot. One big thing I do when I'm experimenting with sounds is I'll make whatever change I'm making, and then I'll go back to the beginning and sort of make more changes. So EQ decisions that I made that were probably done with different content are gonna stay on like once with everything else going on after it. But I might make changes that probably don't have the same problems I had before. But they're still going to go through with it just because that's what the chain is doing now. I'm not totally sure if that's the best way of doing it. It's just how I do it. We are compressing the balls out of it, but this is where something interesting occurs. I'm automating the mid band. I have done this before, but like the sort of the goal that I'm getting out of Maximus right now is using it more as like a saturation kind of thing. Except for in the low end, because there's not really much point in distorting those frequencies for this kind of sound. But for the mids and the highs, they are. And in the mids in particular, you can see they're automating around when I have no audio on. Hey, and what this is doing is that like this curve with these time variables, which cause a very particular kind of distortion, are only going to be activated on these frequencies when they're doing their thing. And that kind of almost high pass like on animation modulation that we're hearing is the result of this. Indeed. So I use this a lot. Like if your goal is to use like a wave shaper, use it like a wave shaper. Just interpret the curve, except with the idea that 0 dB is here instead of here, which it is on the wave shaper. So like this looks an awful lot like what I usually do when I'm saturating stuff, and it just has to do with how fast time variables are. You see the attack and sustain and the delay are all the way off, but the release is up only a little bit. It's still distorting because the attack is on, or rather all the way off. So it's still actuating faster than the oscillation is and when it begins. But bringing the release down a little bit, and also with the curves being so not curvy as they are with what these numbers indicate. Yes, and the release being this short means it's still doing it, but it's almost like a filter, because depending on if it goes faster than that, then you can have higher frequency resulting information versus going slower than that, where there's a bit of a ceiling to that. Same deal with the higher frequency content, except the content isn't as fast and isn't being as distorted because of the aliasing stuff we talked about before, and also because being higher frequency content, it means that like the frequencies that are necessary to create distortion are now much higher. Because in this range, you can see like the lowest level here is I don't know, 1 or 2, like 1-ish 0.1 kilohertz there. So that means that like these have to be actuating faster than oscillation that's happening 1,000 times a second, 1,100 times a second. So that's really, really, really fast. I mean, these are measured in milliseconds, so you can absolutely get there. But that's what I'm talking about. Like in the low frequencies, we're talking about 50 hertz. That's not very fast, which means that how low these could be before it starts to distort is actually quite a bit more pronounced than the other two. And the mids beginning at around 250 hertz. That's pretty a little bit faster, but it's still pretty slow. And the highest frequencies, if I were to make this a bit like higher up here, they would be really hard to actually distort. Unless they're just off, unless you just have no time variable whatsoever, in which case everything distorts. On the master, I have the saturation engaged, the compression a little bit open, and also a little bit of expansion, and again, really fast. So like when you see this sort of like white blur as opposed to a white line, that's how you know that you're going pretty fast. Sometimes, depending on the note you're using, and given as well that we're doing this on bass content, notes that are really low, it's really easy to get compressors to act faster than it. Yeah, see, there you go. You can see like each of these little bumps here are basically one end of the oscillation of a waveform here, and you can see the white line adhering to it more or less entirely, and that's how you know your compressor is distorting. Yeah. Anyway, reverb doing its thing. It's just kind of high frequency stuff, and it's just to give it a little bit of room. I wasn't totally pleased with the spread that happens when using the panning at the origin of it all at the generation point, and then a whole bunch of EQ to kind of like contain it, because it wasn't the grandest of sounds coming out of the compressor. So continue in just a bit. And then this is just a sine wave here. And I have a low pass here, but this is pointless. This low pass was here originally because if I use sounds that are pretty clean, like this one is, I usually like to use it as the original source as a sub. It's because the whole reason why you separate subs are because the kind of processing that does this sort of thing usually leaves you with a sub that's really, really, really messy and hard to master and hard to mix. So separating the sub means that you get yourself a cleaner sub that you're more in control of. However, if like your bass is just like a saw wave, then like your sub in there is fine because it's not dirty. It's just there. It's just doing it. So the least dirty your sounds are, the more viable their subs can be. I made that try to be a thing here, and it didn't really work out. So I have a separate sub that's just a separate sub, but that EQ is still. I guess it is doing something, but I probably wouldn't notice if it wasn't there. Yeah. So the Racecarness, like I started talking about before about like why it sort of sounds like this the way it does. Like think about how an engine works. It's full of a whole bunch of oscillations. You got your cylinders, you got fans and belts and stuff. It's just things that are rotating really, really fast, and they're not all rotating at the same speed. But when you put extra gas into the machine, everything increases or decreases together. So you get like whatever the weird tone is, but then like when the tone increases and decreases together, you suddenly can get it all as like a solid object in your mind. And this sort of happened that way, where we have like sort of competing together but not perfectly together oscillations. And then of course the pitch changes with the slide notes going on. And then messing around with the middle. Like the modulation that's happening here is entirely that Maximus with the mid band. I'm modulating the low end and the high end of that band independently. So we have the low and the high here. So you sort of see which sound sort of kind of happened there, but not just with the modulation, but also coinciding with the specific phase cancellation as a result of the DJing from this particular RM oscillator. How fast that oscillator is, and also how fast like this unison is, which is not very fast. It's like the pitch detune is almost all the way off. Will dramatically affect that kind of modulation, because it all stacks together, it all adds up, and the complexity of adding on a whole bunch of stuff to something like that is sort of to compound those individual elements. It's like it takes a lot of work to make any one thing really shine on its own, but when you add all the stuff together, you get things that are a bit more interesting. Anyway, this FLP, yeah, let's do that. This FLP will be available to download in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.